The shocking discovery, a neighbor's claim leads to more than expected. You know those moments when something feels off, but you can't quite put your finger on it? You brush it off, thinking it's just a small thing, nothing worth your attention. But then, one day, it's as if everything you ignored comes crashing down, revealing that the thing you thought was insignificant was actually the tip of a massive iceberg. That's exactly how I felt when I made the decision to close off my driveway. I never imagined it would lead to anything more than a brief inconvenience for my neighbors. It was just my property, after all, a quiet, seemingly unremarkable stretch of land. But the moment I closed that gate, everything changed. It wasn't just about the driveway anymore. It became about control, about power, and, eventually, it became about a secret buried beneath my feet. One that I wasn't supposed to uncover. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It all started with Karen, my neighbor. She had always been a bit of a character. Always complaining about something, always sticking her nose where it didn't belong. I had dealt with her countless times before, but this time felt different. Karen wasn't just angry because I had decided to keep people out of my driveway. This time she was desperate. Desperate enough to involve the police. And so, the flashing red and blue lights of the squad car made their way to my front gate, signaling the beginning of a chain of events I never saw coming. I stood there on my porch, arms crossed, as I watched two officers approach. Sergeant Doyle, the older of the two, was polite but firm. Officer Rivera, on the other hand, looked skeptical, as if he could already sense that something wasn't quite right about the whole situation. They didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. It wasn't about a driveway at all. Karen's performance. Karen had already launched into her performance by the time the officers stepped out of the car. She was flailing her arms, making accusations like she was reading from a script she had memorized. As I stood there listening to her claim that I was obstructing a public access road, I could tell this wasn't just an isolated complaint. No, Karen had done this before, probably countless times for trivial things. But this time, something about it felt different. Her tone was filled with more than just anger. It was tinged with something that I couldn't quite identify at first. Fear. Maybe? I couldn't help but wonder why she seemed so frantic. As I tried to reason with the officers, asserting that my driveway was private property, Karen scoffed. Her words came in a rush, trying to drown out any sense of logic I presented. "This road has always been open," she yelled, trying to convince the officers that I was some sort of villain who had suddenly decided to block off the community's cherished shortcut. But what struck me most was not her accusations. It was the fact that she didn't want to give up, that she was so certain this wasn't the end of it. Karen had no idea what she was about to unleash. She thought she was in control, but I knew something she didn't. I had uncovered something beneath my property. A secret buried long ago. The hidden secret beneath the surface. You see, just a week before, I had been doing something completely ordinary, digging near the far end of my property to expand my workshop. But that's when I hit something unexpected. Concrete. Not just any concrete, but reinforced concrete. Something felt wrong. It wasn't supposed to be there, and the more I dug, the more I realized that whatever was buried beneath my feet had been sealed off for a reason. A reason I hadn't fully understood yet, but one that would soon change everything. I wasn't just dealing with a neighbor who didn't respect property lines. No, I had accidentally stumbled upon something far bigger. And when strange things started happening, like men in dark clothing walking along my driveway and tampering with my fence, I realized that the world I once knew was starting to unravel. And that's when I began to piece it all together. The strange visits, the hidden tunnel beneath my driveway, and Karen's increasingly erratic behavior. There was more going on than I could have imagined. I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The mysterious SUV and the surveillance. The very night after I made the discovery, my security cameras picked up two men in dark clothing walking by my property, stopping at the spot where I had been digging. But they weren't just walking by, they were searching. That's when the unsettling truth started to sink in. This wasn't about a driveway anymore. It wasn't just about Karen's complaints. I was being watched. and whoever was watching didn't want me to find out what was beneath my feet. The next morning, the fence lock had been tampered with, something I had installed myself. The lock was clipped, hastily replaced with a new one. I knew immediately that I wasn't the only one interested in what lay hidden beneath the dirt. The men from the night before, and the mysterious SUV that seemed to pass my house every few hours, weren't here by accident. But this wasn't just about protecting my property from trespassers. It was about something much darker, something that involved Karen and perhaps even the very land I owned. And the more I looked, the more I realized how little I knew about my own home. The turning point: by the time the police arrived, things had escalated beyond a mere neighborhood dispute. When Officer Rivera asked to see where I had closed off the driveway, I realized that what I had done was more than just a practical decision. It had opened a door to something much bigger. As I led the officers to the new steel gate I had installed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far beyond my control. Karen was still angry, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. I saw it as she glanced nervously at my house, at the place where I had been digging. It was as if she knew something I didn't. And that's when the realization hit me. She wasn't just angry about the driveway. She was scared. Scared of what might come to light if I kept digging. But it was too late to stop now. The unearthing secrets, surveillance, and escalating tension. As the tension began to build and the conflict with Karen escalated, I realized this was no longer just about a neighbor's petty complaints. I had unknowingly stepped into something much deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of my seemingly peaceful life. My actions, the simple act of closing off my driveway, had triggered a chain of events that would change everything. It wasn't just the driveway anymore. It was what I had uncovered beneath it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my quiet suburban life was anything but ordinary. The strange men in dark clothing, the mysterious SUV that circled my block, and the increasingly bizarre actions of Karen were all pieces of a puzzle I couldn't ignore. And yet, there I was, caught in the middle of something far bigger than a property dispute. The strange occurrences were no longer just coincidences. They were part of something carefully orchestrated, something that I was now deeply entangled in. The mysterious figures and the first clue. The first sign that something was terribly wrong happened the night after I unearthed the concrete slab. I had been in my workshop, sorting through tools and checking over my security footage, when the images of the two men emerged on my screen. They were walking along my driveway, dressed in dark clothing. Their movements were deliberate and cautious. They weren't neighbors, that much was certain. They weren't here by chance. They were here because they knew something I didn't. I watched, frozen, as the men stopped at the exact spot where I had been digging. They didn't do anything obvious, but I could tell that they were looking for something. Something they believed was hidden beneath the dirt. After a few moments of standing still, they left. No words were exchanged. No signs of aggression, just quiet observation. But something in me told me that this was only the beginning. The next day, I went outside to find that my fence had been tampered with. The lock, the one I had installed myself, was clipped and hastily replaced with a new one. I was no longer dealing with the nuisance of a neighbor's complaint. I was dealing with something far more dangerous. Someone, or something, was trying to keep me from finding out what lay buried beneath my driveway. Karen's subtle fear, something she knows that I don't. As if the strange men weren't enough, Karen's behavior took a noticeable shift. She was still furious about the driveway being closed, but it wasn't her usual self-righteous indignation that caught my attention. It was the fear. When she spoke to the other neighbors, her voice was quiet, almost hushed. She kept looking over at my house, glancing at the exact spot where I had been digging. Something about it felt off, and I couldn't help but wonder, did Karen know more than she was letting on? That night, I reviewed the footage again. The men, the lock, Karen's odd behavior. It was all starting to fit together. I needed answers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that, by digging deeper, I was pushing myself closer to a secret I wasn't supposed to uncover. But there was no turning back now. A mysterious SUV and the growing threat. The next few days were tense. I kept an eye on the driveway, the cameras, and even my neighbors. And that's when I saw it. Another black SUV, slowly rolling past my house. It didn't stop. It didn't even slow down for more than a moment, but I caught a glimpse of the driver. A man, wearing a dark suit, eyes hidden behind tinted windows. The vehicle didn't feel like a simple passerby. It felt deliberate. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Officer Rivera, who had been questioning me earlier, looked visibly uncomfortable when the SUV passed. His jaw tightened as he caught sight of it, and I could tell that whatever was going on, he wasn't entirely in the loop either. He had his suspicions, but he didn't know who was behind this, or why they were watching me. The SUV returned again, and again, and again, circling my block. The tension was palpable, and it was clear that whoever was in that vehicle knew exactly what I had found. And they weren't going to let me get away with it without a fight. The tipping point, a sudden visit from Officer Rivera. The next morning, my routine was shattered by a knock at the door. It was Officer Rivera, standing there, arms crossed, his face unreadable. I could sense the unease in his stance as he asked to come inside. I reluctantly let him in, unsure of what to expect. I had grown to trust him, but now even the police felt like part of the mystery. He didn't waste any time. "I need you to tell me exactly what you found," he said, his voice low. The tension in the air was so thick I could cut it with a knife. I had already shown him the paperwork proving I had every right to close off my driveway. But this was different. This wasn't just about property rights. This was about what lay beneath the surface. I hesitated, weighing my options. Could I trust Rivera with what I had uncovered? I walked over to the patio door and pulled back the curtain, pointing toward the disturbed earth at the far end of my property. It's not just a driveway. There's something underneath it, some kind of structure. I don't know what it is, but it's old, and it was sealed off intentionally. Rivera looked at the spot, his face unreadable. I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He showed me a grainy image from his dashcam, taken in the early hours of the morning. It was of the black SUV. It was parked 2 blocks from my house at 4:17 a.m. The timestamp on the image made my stomach drop. They were watching me. They knew I was getting close. The sudden realization, a Soviet secret and an unsolved mystery. We made our way back to the site. Rivera and I both knew that this wasn't going to end well. Whatever was buried beneath the surface was far bigger than either of us could have imagined. And as we stood there, looking at the sealed concrete slab, I realized that I wasn't just digging up dirt. I was digging up a past that someone was willing to kill to protect. The old metal beneath the concrete wasn't just some abandoned structure. It was something more, something that had been intentionally hidden. The sounds of an engine hummed in the distance, and I knew that the black SUV had returned. The car was moving slowly, deliberately. Whoever was behind the wheel wasn't just watching. They were waiting for me to make my next move. A sudden warning, and the urgency to act. As the SUV passed again, Rivera looked at me with a warning in his eyes. "We need to move fast. Whatever's under there isn't something you can just walk away from." His words sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't ready to face whatever lay beneath the concrete, but I was already too far in. The only option was to keep going. And then Karen showed up. She was terrified. I had never seen her so rattled before. Her usual arrogance was gone, replaced with fear. She knew something I didn't, and I needed to find out what that was, before it was too late. The descent, uncovering the truth and confronting the danger. As the days passed, the urgency of the situation became undeniable. The tension wasn't just something I could ignore any longer. It was real, and it was escalating at a pace I couldn't keep up with. My quiet life, which had revolved around small neighborhood disputes and minor inconveniences, had become a high-stakes race to uncover a secret that had been buried for decades. And with every step I took toward the truth, the more it seemed like something or someone was determined to stop me from finding out. Karen's unexpected revelation, the truth about her fear. When Karen knocked on my door that morning, I was caught off guard. She wasn't the same Karen I had dealt with for weeks. Gone was the angry, self-righteous neighbor, replaced by a woman who was visibly shaken, her usual bravado completely absent. I didn't know what to expect from her, whether this was just another attempt to get me to stop closing off my driveway, or if she had finally come to terms with the gravity of the situation. I stepped aside, letting her in. I had no idea what she was going to say, but I knew it was important. When she started speaking, her words were hushed, and she was visibly trembling. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously around my living room, as if expecting someone to be watching. I stood there, confused but listening. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment when everything clicked. Karen wasn't just a meddling neighbor. She was part of something bigger, something she had never intended to be a part of. And as her story unfolded, I realized that she, too, was a pawn in this game, one that had spun completely out of control. Karen revealed that her brother had once worked in real estate development in this area, and his company had been hired to assess land values, including my property. The strange part? My land had never been properly recorded as available for private purchase. It wasn't listed in any of the public records. When Karen's brother dug deeper into the land's history, he stumbled upon something that didn't make sense. A discrepancy in the ownership that shouldn't have been there. Just days after his discovery, men in suits visited him. The next week, his office was mysteriously burned down. After that, he quit his job and never spoke about it again. Karen, terrified for her brother's safety, had been careful about asking too many questions. But what she hadn't anticipated was that the people watching my property would now turn their attention to her. And that was what terrified her the most. As she spoke, I could sense the shift in her. This wasn't just about controlling a neighborhood anymore. This was about survival. Whoever was behind this, whoever had orchestrated the cover-up of the truth, was willing to do whatever it took to keep it hidden. And now I was in their sights. The sudden urgency. We had to act fast. I had always prided myself on thinking logically and making careful decisions. But at that moment, I realized that careful thinking had its limits. There was no more time to waste. Whatever was buried beneath my driveway wasn't just a relic of the past. It was something actively being protected by forces that would stop at nothing to keep it buried. Karen's warning echoed in my mind. If they're willing to go after me for just knowing too much, then you're already in deeper than you think. The SUV had circled the block again, and now I was certain. They knew I was close to uncovering the truth. They weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting for me to make the next move so they could stop me. Rivera's voice was calm but serious. "We need to move fast. If we're going to do this, we need to do it now before they get any closer." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about solving a mystery anymore. This was about getting out alive. We couldn't just keep digging, hoping that the answers would come. No, this was now a race against time. And I had to trust my instincts. If Karen was right, if these people had been watching me for so long, then they already knew what I had uncovered. They had all the power, and I was just one person with a shovel and a burning curiosity. But the moment I decided to dig deeper, to uncover the truth, I was no longer just an observer. I was a threat, the moment of truth, descending into the unknown. With Rivera's guidance and Karen reluctantly agreeing to help, we made our way toward the site that had started it all. The back of my property, the spot where I had been digging, was now more than just dirt and concrete. It was a battleground, a place where something old, something dangerous, lay buried, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to uncover it. As we approached, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. There was no turning back. What we found wasn't just going to answer questions, it was going to open up a whole new world of danger. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what lay beneath the surface. We reached the spot where I had uncovered the concrete slab. It was still covered, waiting for us to finish what we started. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling as I reached for the tarp. Rivera stepped forward, his eyes scanning the surroundings, clearly aware of the risk we were taking. He wasn't afraid to admit it either. "No backup. No radios," I said, my voice low and tense. "We do this quietly or not at all." Rivera nodded, and we moved quickly, pulling back the tarp. The concrete slab gleamed in the weak light of the early morning. It wasn't just a concrete slab. It was something far more significant, reinforced, sealed, and untouched by time. Something that had been buried for a reason. We gripped the crowbar and, together, began to pry the slab free. It shifted slightly, groaning as if it were alive. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just old concrete. This was the first real indication that we were on the verge of something much bigger than we could have ever imagined. Then, the noise came. A deep, hollow groan from beneath, like a pressure valve releasing. My stomach churned. Whatever was hidden down there wasn't just old. It was carefully sealed for a reason. We forced the slab open, and as it shifted, the staleness of the air hit us. It was as if we were disturbing something ancient, something that had been meant to stay hidden. The final descent, what lies beneath. I crouched down, shining my flashlight into the hole. A metal ladder led down into the unknown. The walls were smooth, reinforced, and marked with faded warning signs in a language I didn't recognize. This wasn't just some abandoned structure. This was a purpose-built bunker or facility, something that had been designed to last. Karen stepped back, her face pale, her hands tightly clutching her arms. "What is this place?" she whispered. "You're not seriously going down there, are you?" I didn't answer. I had already made my decision. Whatever this was, whatever secret had been buried here, I needed to know the truth. I wasn't going to stop now. We descended carefully, the air growing colder as we moved deeper into the facility. The silence was deafening. And then, at the end of the corridor, we saw it. A rusted door, still intact, with the unmistakable hum of machinery behind it. As Rivera cautiously pushed the door open, we were met with a small room filled with outdated computer terminals and thick cables. It looked abandoned except for one thing. Someone had been here recently. The controls were dusty, but there were fresh fingerprints on the keyboard. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a bunker. It was an old Soviet facility, and it had been buried for a reason. The papers scattered across the floor were written in Cyrillic. The logos, barely legible, were unmistakably Soviet. Karen's face went white. "What the hell is this?" I didn't know, but I was going to find out, no matter the cost. As we journey through this mysterious and increasingly dangerous situation, there's one key lesson that stands out. The truth often lies hidden beneath the surface, and uncovering it can have unexpected consequences. What began as a simple dispute about a driveway quickly turned into a much larger and more complex story, one that involved secrets, surveillance, and forces beyond our control. We're often faced with situations that seem straightforward at first. But as we dig deeper, we find that things are rarely as they seem. Whether it's a neighbor who seems to be just a nuisance or an abandoned property that hides a dark past, sometimes the most significant discoveries come when we least expect them. The question is, are you ready to face the truth, no matter how dangerous or unsettling it may be? This journey isn't just about uncovering secrets. It's about standing up for what's right, trusting your instincts, and finding the courage to push forward, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's a reminder that we are all connected to something much bigger, and sometimes the mysteries we face are more than just our own. If you've been following along, you're probably just as intrigued as I am about what's buried beneath the surface. And believe me, the story doesn't end here. There's still so much more to uncover, and you won't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see where the story goes next, make sure to like this video to show your support. Every like helps the channel grow and brings more stories like this to life. Share this video with friends or family who love a good mystery. Let's see who else can help us figure out what's going on here. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on all future videos. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Comment below. What do you think is really hidden beneath the driveway? Have you ever uncovered something unexpected? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that start with a simple question. And who knows what mysteries you might uncover when you start asking the right ones.